The core proposition of what a marketeer's role is hasn't changed then and now, except for the digital piece that's kind of come in. So at times, I kind of believe that not much has changed from a brand building point of view, which is to say that you have a product or a service, you need to kind of convey the value prop of that based on the persona of consumers that you want to go after. Brand takes time, brand takes investment, brand takes great ideas, brand takes understanding what the emotions are, right? It's just not about having money, getting a celebrity, doing a TV commercial, running it during IPL. People need to be patient with what brand as a concept is, right? So the challenge with over-analysis is the art part of really creating those emotional communication somewhere has kind of, fallen away.
Hello, I'm Manu Prasad, and you're welcome to Brandwidth, a full stack marketing podcast where we speak to people from across the brand and marketing ecosystem, from VCs and founders to CMOs and heads of marketing, to agency folks and specialists in different domains. Through their stories, experiences, and perspectives, we gain insights into the nuts and bolts of marketing. Brandwidth is produced by Spooler, an end to end podcast production company. I have to confess, outside of this name and the idea of Brandwidth, I had zero clue on how to go about recording a podcast, editing it, making sure it appears on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Deezer, and so on and so forth. Spooler helped me bring my sound strategy to life by managing it end to end. All I have to do these days is get the guest and start speaking. They say brand building is a marathon. They also say that being a VC is a marathon. My guest today has done both. But the story actually doesn't end there. Maybe just because he's a VC and he wants to test out the hypothesis, what does he do? He goes and runs a full marathon in Bombay. So we'll talk about all of this: brands, VCs, and marathons. But first, introducing our guest on the second episode of Brandwidth, Sanjay Ramakrishnan, founder and general partner, Multiply Ventures, an early stage VC focusing on consumer tech. It's actually late afternoon in Bangalore, but just for old time's sake, and I'll get you in on that very, very soon. Good morning, Sanjay, and welcome to Brandwidth.
Hey, good morning, Manu. It's super awesome to kind of be here.
We have another friend somewhere in the background, so it's almost like a little WorldSpace reunion. Binoy runs Spooler, which is producing this podcast, so you can say hi to Binoy as well.
Hey, Binoy.
So I thought we should begin with a super quick career summary. So the way I see it, if someone were to look at the best domain to work with in a particular decade, starting from the late 90s, yours would be the LinkedIn profile to go to. So we're talking about media in the 90s, then telecom and satellite radio in the early 2000s, followed by Intel and Google, then Myntra and Flipkart in the 2010s, and a stint in Ogilvy as country head and president of Neo, and then straight into the VC world. So this is like a dream career profile for most people. So all I can ask you is, how the hell did all this happen? Was it planned, or like Jobs says, you're connecting dots backwards? What is the story here?
I think it's a fairly good question to kind of begin this conversation, right? So if I kind of go back in time, till about the initial 10 years of my career, I guess it was planned. And the next, possibly whatever opportunities came my way, I just kind of took it, right? I started my career in sales, which is in Times of India. And that too in Times of India, Bangalore is where I kind of, spent most of my sales career. And few things that happened out there. One was it was a die-hard day-to-day sales job, right? It taught me a whole bunch of things in terms of, I started with sales, thinking that sales is where my career is going to be. But soon I kind of learned that that's not where my heart was. My heart was in marketing. When I kind of got my MBA done, that was in marketing as well, but didn't get a marketing job. So that's how I kind of started my career in Times of India in terms of sales. I had both good and quote unquote bad managers very early. So I kind of figured out during that period of time in terms of what really gets productivity going and what doesn't. And this good and bad, I kind of had my own kind of framework in terms of what I should be as I kind of go along the career. Tried really hard in terms of getting a marketing break, because I was selling to marketeers all my life in the 3 years that I spent in Times of India, and always wanted the other side of the job and not necessarily liking what I was doing. But day to day, there was a sales target. You just went about kind of meeting them. And FMCG is where my heart was. I said, if you want to be a marketer, and these are all the initial myths of coming out of a B school and you're starting a career. And I was kind of told that, FMCG is where you kind of build the fundamentals of marketing. So I tried really hard kind of getting a break into that. Never got one for two reasons. One was purely on perception. I was not from a tier 1 MBA. I was not from an IIM. So it's a fairly close group those days in terms of how you kind of break into a thing. Second thing was the very, very clear condition that if you're not from FMCG, you don't make it into FMCG, right? So all the industries those days, in some industries even now, what I call is inbreeding of, they like this inbreeding. They want people from the same industry. They don't want people from the other industry. Somehow the perception was that that's how you kind of, do well, in terms of, the industries that you kind of, run. So that's what happened with me. So finally, the final break came with Spice Telecom in terms of telecom from there. So it was a very, very, at that point from Times to Spice was essentially led by what is the first marketing job that I would kind of get. If it's a decent enough brand, I would kind of take it. And that was the first one. And my manager took a bet on me at that point in time. His name was Kavarbeer Singh. I think one of the best managers I've ever had in my life. And then my marketing career took off from there, fell in love with what marketing means. And from then on, all the brands that we kind of spoke about, one thing led to the other. So I would say till 2010, I worked for fairly larger kind of brands or known brands. My first startup was Myntra. And then 2010 is when I actually wanted to be a VC. And I'll kind of, we'll kind of delve into that a little later. And 10 years later is when I actually kind of became one, right? So from 2010, few things were planned. I had some goals. But otherwise, the brands that you see on my resume, it doesn't say all the story in terms of what I enjoyed, what I didn't. But yeah, for an outsider, it's like it kind of checked all the boxes in terms of the brands that you worked for, right? And these are the brands that people generally kind of perceive to be good brands if you want to have marketing as a career. So that's how it's kind of evolved. The last 6 years of me, or the last 5 years of me getting into the venture space has been, I would say, very, very fulfilling, and we'll talk a lot about that as well. But so that's the way my career has kind of progressed in terms of starting with sales, moving to marketing, and whatever opportunities came my way, just taking it there. And some early learnings, you need luck in your favor. So luck played a role in terms of some of the opportunities that came. And the biggest is ability to take some bit of risks, right? So if you're kind of getting very early into category creation kind of role, there is a risk that you're taking. What if it doesn't work? You need to have a plan B, right? So, but, when I kind of look back at my 22, 23 years, I think I'm a happy guy at this point in time. So things kind of worked out. So, yeah.
Sounds good. So I think I have all of my questions are probably follow-up questions to parts of whatever you said right now. So I think I'll begin with this part that somewhere it's almost like planning out 10 years in advance, at least to begin with. Is that something that somebody you think can replicate now? Not in terms of specific brands, but in terms of mindset in this rapidly changing world. Is that something that you would recommend or think somebody could do?
I think it all depends on what's your starting point and how much can you kind of plan, right? So if I take my career as an example out there, not everything was, the only plan was, can I move from sales to marketing? So that was my first level of goal that I had, right? But if you already are coming from a tier 1 B school and you clearly kind of say that I want to kind of make a career path in marketing, then you kind of start joining organizations that you believe are good marketing organizations, right? So there are many in the country at this point in time. So that's the first step. I think the second step is, really enjoying your role. And I think there are two components to it. First is, do you like the category that you're marketing? It shouldn't be, in the ideal case, the utopian case is, do I like the category? Am I a big consumer of that category? And am I kind of getting, intersection of this in a brand that I kind of like to work very early in my career? Then your life becomes extremely cool and good, which is because you're consuming that, you have lots of insights as a consumer, you're passionate about that category, so you do lots more work to kind of understand the nuances of how consumption happens, and thereby it kind of impacts how you kind of deliver the marketing role, right? So I think that's the initial bit in terms from a framework. right? And the second bit is once you've spent, I would say, 8 to 10 years in terms of, whether it's, few companies that you work for, is then kind of taking a pause and kind of asking yourself, what is it that I want over the next decade, right? I think 10 years is a great segue to kind of plan the next 10 years. Are you a pure marketeer, which means that I want to just continue in marketing, go deep into it, want to be a CMO of whatever kind of company? Or do you see a business side to yourself, which is say, I want to kind of run a company at some point in time. I want to be a CEO of a company, small, big, medium, whatever it may be, right? I think that's a second call that you need to take. And the third one is not necessarily any of this. I want to start something on my own. And what does that mean in terms of, what are the learnings out there? If you want to really start something, there are different ways. One is to just go out and kind of figure out in terms of, what are the opportunities. And the second bit is, if that's not working out, you kind of pick up an industry that you really want to make a mark and say, can I just get my hands dirty knowing that industry, figuring out the problem statements, and then going out and kind of starting something, right? I think those are the three frameworks in terms of how one can really plan the career. And lastly is, you need, the luck plays a role. I think everything in life. So luck needs to kind of play a role in terms of ability for you to kind of learn both structured and unstructured very early in terms of making those decisions as the opportunities kind of come in, right? I've not taken lots of opportunities itself, right? When I kind of go back again, there are a whole bunch of things I said no to, and there are a whole bunch of things that I said yes to, right? But for those decisions, you need to have some kind of, framework, which is your own, not necessarily somebody else's, right? So I think that's the way I would kind of, plan something.
Yeah, I think what I would probably add on to that is that in many ways you're also positioning yourself in such a way that you let luck come to you in from multiple directions, and that could help you get more options out of where you want your career to go. So before we get into the deep dive of Spice and WorldSpace and all that, a
Yeah.
very generic question in terms of, let's say, your favorite area. So you've worked across the stack, right? So there is brand strategy, positioning, advertising and media, digital marketing, product marketing, and on the traditional side, the startup side and agency side. So any particular area, domain, specialization, anything that you feel was exactly what you want? I think you mentioned that from after the FMCG play
Yeah. Yeah.
in your head. What is the next best thing?
I would say at a heart, I'm a marketeer. Even now, I think
Hmm.
I'm a marketeer, right? So I would say just running marketing as a function, whatever be the title out there, but running marketing as a function has been the most fulfilling, right? And I've done that in few places. Myntra has been one of my favorite roles that I kind of did purely from the challenge it kind of threw as a marketeer, right? WorldSpace, again, going back in time, was a very, very challenging role. Again, it was a new category creation. So I like the 0 to 1 journey a lot. Again, these are all reflections. Once you kind of sit down after 20 years, you can kind of go back in time and kind of see what worked for you, what did you really enjoy. I like the 0 to 1 kind of journey a lot. I like the large bit of unknowns out there. But fundamentally, I like marketing as a function, right? I think you're paid to kind of really add value to all of the functions in an organization. So that's the way I see marketing, right? And it's pretty much the core of any product or services. I mean, it's almost, I kind of call it the heart of every organization, because you need to you are the, segue between the consumers and the organization, right? And consumers are the ones paying for the product or the service that you kind of deliver. So it's very, very essential, very fundamental, and you can kind of influence a whole bunch of things within the organization, whether it is sales to kind of just give them a cover so that the sales job becomes easier, whether it's HR in terms of talent and internal communication, you can kind of play a part out there. Customer experience and customer service, you kind of play a part out there if you're a strong enough kind of a brand. So I think you play and influence a large part of the organization culture. And so I like that fundamentally in terms of the power of marketing. And the second part that I kind of really like is playing it as a team, right? I really like working with good set of folks. So I've been lucky in that sense as well. In many of my roles, both upstream in terms of my manager that I work for, I've had majority of the time I have great managers, and the team that have helped me kind of be wherever I wanted to be, right? So I think that's the part that I kind of like, not specific to a brand as a function or digital as a function, so on and so forth. I like marketing as a whole.
Got it. So I think the Drucker definition is solving the needs of the customer in the most profitable manner. And if that is marketing, then actually gives a leeway into pretty much every sort of management that there is in the organization. And these days, it's not only the customer, so you've got multiple stakeholders, but even their brand does, like you said, if it's HR, then there is a employer brand to play with. If there are investor relations, there is a brand to be played with as
True.
well. So I think, that practically, I probably would agree with that, because that I think is a joy for me as a marketeer as well, that it is not just one domain that you're really looking at. It's like a diverse set of domains across the board, and they're all different. They all
Yeah.
bring their own challenges, their own sets of people, own sets of rules, and navigating all of them and still delivering for your customer as well as other stakeholders is probably the joy of marketing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So with that, I think we are ready to start deep diving into your career. So Spice, you mentioned earlier the first
Yeah.
marketing job. So
Hi.
how was the transition like? And what was the steepness of the learning curve, if you had to put it that
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
in terms of getting in from sales into marketing?
Lots. I thought, for some reason, I thought I was a good marketeer, right? When I kind of went in out there and I said, joining this company that's already kind of done some bit of good work. Spice was a known brand. Just in terms of context, Spice Telecom had only two circles. There was a Punjab circle and a Karnataka circle. But there were only two circles. So you were a regional player, so to say. I think that was one. But when I kind of came in purely from a sales into marketing, there are a whole bunch of things, frameworks that I was not aware of, right? Starting from how do you write a creative brief for an agency to kind of get you to kind of do what is kind of necessary. Writing a brand document, everybody talks about brand in a very loose way, but if you've not worked for a pure play good marketing company, it is very loosely kind of spoken about. But how tight should your brand be, right? Lots of those were the initial part of the learning. So it was absolutely brand marketing 101 that I kind of learned in Spice, right? In terms of, what are the structures, what are the frameworks, what are the tools? So all of that was the initial learning. But once I kind of did that, and because this was my first role and I loved it, right? It was almost like going back to B school, but here somebody's paying you a monthly salary. And we had a super, super team. I think that's the first time when I had a phenomenally good team, both working with me and I spoke about Cover, who was my manager at that point in time. So the learning bit, I would say, was a very clear 3 to 6 months kind of an effort in terms of real rigorous learning in terms of what the brand stood for, how do you kind of deliver this brand promise to your consumers, and so on and so forth. But having said that, I think the rest was, I would say, lots of things that you did on the job, right? Working with an agency. The other thing, big learning for me at Spice was, how do you really get the best out of an agency, right? What is that creative brief? How do you really brief the agency out there? How do you really kind of make a decision in terms of whether a campaign works or not, right? How do you kind of do customer insighting? Really kind of going out, talking to consumers, so on and so forth. So lots of those fundamentals in terms of what you learn, but how you kind of really get it done in terms of work is what Spice kind of gave me. It also gave me an opportunity to. It was though it was a sunrise kind of a sector, it was a very hard sector when I joined the company, in the sense that everything changed when the government of India made incoming calls free. I think that really opened the floodgates as far as telecom is concerned in this country. Right? That's a massive decision that the government took. Till then, when I joined the company, I know we were selling both incoming and outgoing was 16 rupees a minute. So if I don't like somebody, I just make a call, right? That guy needs to pay 16 bucks. So it was that bad. And once this decision came in, I think floodgates were kind of open. The whole bunch of, goodness that happened for the category as such. So you kind of ride the wave. So that was one big, tailwind that happened for the sector, and that's helped Spice, and this helped my marketing career as well in terms of ability to kind of deliver on that. The second bit is the constraints of being a regional brand meant you had to do things slightly differently versus an Airtel or a Hutch. At that point, it was Hutch. Now it's Vodafone, which were national kind of players. So they had a national media spend. They could be on television at a national level. So thereby, ability for them to kind of build trust, build identity was far more easier than you, which is a regional player. because you had to kind of play to what is, in Karnataka as a circle, right? So that meant that you had to think very differently. You had to think through the brand very differently. You had to make campaigns and references very, very differently, right? So again, the early learnings in terms of what that meant happened out there. So we used, again, an example of that could be, since you were a local player, your mainstream in terms of media choice was either local print, or at that time it was radio. We used radio extensively as a medium of choice to really kind of be relevant or stay relevant, versus a couple of the larger players out there. And we held the ground in terms of, as a brand and as a business for a fairly long period of time. So that was Spice. Did some very, very good creative work, very, very strong brand franchisee that Spice kind of built. So, for me, that was essentially where I learned all the fundamentals of, how we kind of run marketing, brand, so to say.
Yeah, so I completely agree on that brief part. So writing a brief, I think, gives you the kind of clarity that you will never get otherwise. So writing a good brief not only helps the agency, helps your thought process also.
Totally.
But I think Spice would probably be, in a way, if when you think about it, distribution and product were fairly on parity by then. So it meant that the opportunity was for Spice to do the brand heavy lifting, and that meant that you could learn quite a bit there as well, as opposed to, let's say, in a different circumstance, and we'll talk about WorldSpace and probably Myntra also later. It was a different kind of brand experience. The flavor was different in that sense.
Yeah, it was. So in the case of Spice, just to kind of dig a little deeper, right? So a couple of things. One was, prepaid was the instrument of choice those days. I think it still possibly continues, but it was largely prepaid was what was kind of driving volumes at that point. So you kind of had to kind of pick nuances from the market in terms of how can you kind of compete with a national level player based on simple but very, very powerful insights. So in this case, prepaid was sold with a number in mind. You're a Airtel 99 plan or an Airtel 199 plan, because the billing was 99 or 199, and that's the way it was kind of sold. And Spice had to kind of come out with something slightly different. So Spice, we kind of said, can we brand it differently, right? So we kind of, and who are the consumers who need prepaid, right? So we actually came with I remember at that point in time, a very, very nice proposition called Spice Youth. It became a fairly big franchisee. Spice Youth was a prepaid platform that we kind of launched. It was not a number. And Youth came with a loyalty card. And the loyalty card had a whole bunch of local partnerships, discounts, so on and so forth. So there was a vanity in terms of you having that Spice Youth having that card, right? So you had to figure out your own kind of niche and kind of build that, right? So that was possibly one bit. And with Spice Youth, the other insight that we got is, can you make Kannada cool to be kind of relevant, right? So the entire campaign of Lingolila that became on radio that went, went for a fairly long period of time is how we build the brand franchisee. Kannada becoming cool. Every day there's a word of Kannada that you kind of, through radio kind of communicate, but it had a, like English, it had a Kannada English kind of narrative to it. And that stayed for a very, very long period of time, in terms of what it did to the brand, right? So I think you had to play as a regional player very, very differently, yet kind of making sure that it's still aspirational for that, for the audience, yet kind of making your own differentiated kind of products within a very, very large competing kind of, space, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think Lingolila, probably they should bring it back right now. Right now is probably a very, very good time for the way things are going in Bangalore. Anyway, we'll move from Spice to Space. Small vowel movement, but I think massively different category. So the way I tell people is that in WorldSpace is where I hired you. Obviously, that's a joke, because what happened then was WorldSpace somewhere in 2003 realized that they've got double-digit crores to spend, and the guy that they've got in marketing has exactly got 1 year of experience. So that's how they ended up hiring Sanjay to manage me. So in a way, it was category creation, obviously, because satellite radio was really unknown. The radio was known. But I think there would be some learnings that you took from Spice to WorldSpace. Was there anything, or was it a completely new space for you?
Yeah. So as a business, it was completely new because I think what happens in a competitive landscape is you can still learn from competition in terms of best practices, right? In terms of if in the case of Spice, if Airtel did a great campaign or Hutch did a great campaign or they launched a new product, you can kind of go back to the drawing board and kind of really learn from it and say, how did we miss this or what can we do, right? But WorldSpace was the only player in the category, the only satellite radio company in the country, right?
True.
So what happens is, if anything that you do was category creation, and if whatever you didn't deliver, then you again had to kind of go back and really kind of, you were the only market creator out there, right? So that was a massive, massive challenge. That was one. So that was slightly different from what Spice was from a role point of view. Second was the product delivery was, I would say, hard, right? Because
Yes.
right. So and the product is, and throughout that 3 years, the product was not complete, in the real sense. So you're still kind of selling a service or marketing a service that fundamentally is good for consumers, but it had its share of challenges, right? So you had to kind of, yeah. So it became a difficult category to scale in a very predictable manner because the product was not complete, right? So that was the second challenge, I would say, from a role point of view. And the third was, largely in terms of, how do you really kind of build the brand franchisee, being the only player at a pan-India kind of level with a very, very constrained kind of marketing budget, right? So all those three, I would say, was the challenge at that point in time from a role point of view. But I loved music. I still do. So it was one of those categories. When I kind of started this podcast, I spoke to you about, passion as a consumption coming together for a marketer. So for me, it was a dream role that way. I loved music and I loved the category. So I didn't feel that this was just a role for me. I thought this was destiny and I need to do something very meaningful out here. So I loved every bit of what I did in WorldSpace.
So when you think back on it, WorldSpace was like a startup before the startups. We had our own funding winters on a regular basis.
Yeah.
We had massive acquisition costs. We were churning like crazy. And I remember those 16 or 22 digit passwords they used to send out every now and a while. That's like a new form of torture that we had invented at that point in time with those kind of crazy remotes where you had to press 3 times for the last alphabet to come. That was the deal.
True. So I think that's the both funny and sad part of that, right? Because the product delivery was so difficult, right? It was direct to home radio network. Now we have DTH television. It was DTH radio, right? Essentially direct to home radio is what WorldSpace was. You had a satellite that connects, that relays a very specific music through a radio receiver that was at home. But just getting that service delivery was so hard that lots of consumers found it very, very worthwhile, but also extremely hard to kind of get the service on a regular basis, right? So I think that was a challenge in WorldSpace, way ahead of its time in every sense, right? But you didn't have something like that, which is 24/7. I could listen to a genre of music that I wanted, especially niche music. If I'm a jazz lover or blues lover, that is the only source of affordable music those days, right? So that way it was great for a music lover, but just the fact that there was an antenna that kind of came in, you had to connect it, it had to face a certain direction into the sky, there was wires running all around. Yeah, so all of that kind of happened. So that made it very, very challenging, right? So whatever growth we saw was irrespective of the challenges on the product delivery, right? So that was the tough part as far as WorldSpace is concerned.
Yeah, 40 radio stations, one radio. Was amazing.
Yeah, it was.
I still believe there is a market for that kind of product. I know there is the internet, but still I think there's an old world charm of listening to your favorite station 24 hours a day.
I agree with that.
Set.
Totally agree with
that. Right. So in a way, category creation also continued in Myntra. But this was by definition a startup because the terminology was cool then, though it was early. In many ways, did WorldSpace help you prep for that role from that 0 to 1 that you're talking about? If yes, what part and what were the additional learnings that you had to pick up for that?
Got it. In some ways, yes, and not in all, because when I joined WorldSpace, I never thought of it as a startup, right? Because fundamentally, WorldSpace had done a launch much, much prior. It kind of went out of the
Yes.
country and it was a relaunch. So at least in my mind, WorldSpace was a global company. It had few other places where it was kind of relevant, and thereby it kind of came into India. So I never really imagined WorldSpace to be a pure startup experience, but I clearly kind of imagined it to be a new category creation kind of an experience. Right. Myntra was purely a startup in every sense. Right. Uh, and at that point in time, the only reason I took up the role, actually, there were two reasons why I took up the role. One, really loved the vision that the founding team kind of put forth in terms of what they wanted to do. And the company was pivoting from selling personal merchandise to fashion. And fashion was something that I used to kind of follow as an individual. So that again, overlapping in terms of something that you consume a lot and you're passionate about. So I think that was one clear area where I wanted to kind of get into that role. And the second thing was a pure play startup, right? And I said, there seems to be something over here, and kind of saw the patterns in other parts of the world wherein digital kind of came in and commerce started kind of, coming through. And I thought in India too, that would kind of be replicated. So I think those are two fundamentally, reasons in terms of macro and specifically what, the team had in mind, and kind of took up that role.
What were the learnings that you had to pick up outside of what you had learned so far in marketing? Because by the time you would have probably spent around a decade in marketing,
Yeah.
just over a decade, right?
No.
So what fundamentally the internet changed a bunch of things from a consumer's perspective, and also from business perspective in terms of what could be done, what were the consumer expectations to be met, all of that. How did that change the marketing role at that point in time? This is very early in the e-commerce game.
Yeah. I think lots in terms of what I learned on the job, right? So right now I kind of joke about it, but once you're joining a very, very early stage startup and the founder is very honest, right? In this case, the Myntra's founding team Mukesh was. And when they ask you this question that are you okay to kind of work in an ambiguous environment? That's a very, very important question, right? And you need to be absolutely fine with working in an ambiguous setup. And that, and you don't, I think, envisage what ambiguity means till you kind of get in to the trenches, right? So when a startup, I think you just need to be absolutely open to kind of doing any role that is going to help the business. So I think that is one big learning from a shift point of view out there. Second thing is you're always kind of understaffed because when I joined, we just kind of raised a small Series A. You're always understaffed. You don't have enough marketing budget at that point in time. But you've also taken money from quote unquote VCs. So investors have kind of come in. So how do you really kind of make sure those business metrics are met, which typically are fairly aggressive when you're kind of invested, when you take external money, right? So everybody wants hypergrowth, right? And you have lots of limitations. So I think that was the second bit of learning in terms of when you work for a very early stage startup, how do you really work with lots of these constraints with an ambiguous kind of a setup? And the third, I think, very critical learning for me was largely in terms of you're not just doing your own role. You're going to double up into other roles because there's always a talent gap. So though I could call myself the head of marketing, but I remember, with other team members, we didn't have enough stock of, let's say, sports shoes that we ran a campaign. So you go to CMH Road, go to a retail outlet, you buy those shoes and you kind of bring it, right? You go to a distributor's outlet and you kind of bring up these shoes, right? So, but that's a fun part of working for an early stage setup, right? But so every time I kind of, at least right now when I give hiring tips to people, I ask the founding team to kind of really be very honest and transparent about these things, right? Because
circumstances.
Yeah. So because you want somebody coming from a pedigreed college or a pedigreed kind of a corporate in terms of what they have done. But when they come into an early stage startup, there is a clear delta in terms of, what this role is going to be, right? So I think and that conversation is super, super important. If both parties really like and they want to kind of come together, which is both the company and the prospective candidate, and then I think you need to have this fair, threadbare kind of a conversation in terms of what the expectations was. And I think, in that sense, I think Mukesh did a phenomenal job of not just me, but lots of hiring that the team did, is having the final 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour conversation before you're onboarded in terms of what the startup journey is going to be. It was almost like an immersive experience of what it'd be before you kind of took up the role. So I think those three were, I would say, fundamental learning after you kind of got in to the job.
5 years later, Flipkart. So the entire landscape has changed. E-commerce expectations have changed. Competition scenarios have changed, and even the funding environment has changed. How much did you have to relearn or unlearn? Because I remember when I moved from Myntra much later to Urban Ladder, I had a bunch of assumptions and ways in which I used to work, which I thought needed quite a bit of review when I got to Urban Ladder because of all these things. What is your scenario like?
Flipkart was, I would say, different in many ways, right? Number one, it was a fairly well-known brand by the time I kind of entered Flipkart. It had kind of done a great job in terms of marketing itself as a brand, as a brand franchisee, and as a, I would say, category leader in that sense. So Flipkart is fairly well known. So when I kind of went into the organization, it had a great set of team members, right, in terms of who knew, pretty much they've been, and it had a great mix of people who started from the early days of Flipkart and a mix of people that kind of kept coming in. So it had a great mix of people internally. So from a learning point of view, not so much in terms of relearning out there. But when I kind of joined the company, I was actually part of the ads division, which was a new division that Flipkart had. I kind of went into that, right? So I was kind of part of the core team that was given this mandate of building the ads business, and which is something that I've kind of done in the past. So that way, it was a new business within Flipkart that you had to kind of be responsible for. So that way, it was kind of interesting. But Flipkart had a very, very nice brand cover. So wherever you kind of spoke, whomever you wanted to partner with, there was a very positive rub-off because of the brand, right? So that way, I think it was far easier. And this was a core proposition for the company. So thereby the investments were clearly kind of demarcated, for the role itself. So that way, it was, I would say, relatively easy to kind of get into the organization and then kind of build from there. There was not too much of relearning that I had to kind of do. The category was new category creation within the company, and that was the only challenge in terms of how do you really build a credible large ads business, right? And that was for everyone in the ads business to kind of come together and kind of build.
Yeah, on hindsight, this is what they call retail media these days. Walmart, all of that.
Yeah.
So that's really, really early. This is what, 2014, 15? When was this?
Yeah. 15, 14,
Yeah,
15.
that's almost a decade back. Wow,
Correct.
really, really early days.
Yeah.
Right, which also then kind of allows us to segue into the broad picture of this, right? So it's now what, about over 20 years since you started a marketing career, almost 2 decades and a half. So what is really the evolution of marketing that you have seen, if you had to just think back and then come to now, in terms of a bunch of things, right? So there is super specialization that is happening. The role of a CMO is probably in many ways a lot more challenging. And based on your experience on all sides of the equation, what are your perspectives on it? How much has it changed, and what's the good, what's the bad?
No, very interesting question. So I keep kind of having this conversation with others in the marketing fraternity whenever I get a chance to kind of meet any marketing friend of mine. Keep talking about this place, right? So at times I kind of believe that not much has changed from a brand building point of view, which is to say that you have a product or a service, you need to kind of convey the value prop of that based on the persona of consumers that you want to go after. Right? And you need to kind of figure out the media choices in terms of where these personas are. And you need to kind of communicate in a meaningful way for that persona to kind of start being aware in the first place and consider at some point in time when the decision making kind of really happens, right? So that fundamentally has not changed ever since marketing as a function has been there. That hasn't changed. That's the way to do then and now, right? What has changed in a big way is, because of the digital medium, the media choices has become far more fragmented. The time that a consumer spends has got fragmented. So thereby, what you do on social or what you do on search, what you do on other platforms where consumers are spending time, I think that has kind of come in. So the digital media mix has made marketing, I would say a bit more challenging than what it was before, and challenging in a very, very different way, which is to say that because these mediums have become so number driven, there is math to everything. I think, and because you can measure something, I think there is also this, condition of over measuring everything that we do at some point in time. So that the entire digital, mix has become far more science and math driven, and thereby you need specialization to kind of really ace that bit, right? It's pure science. I don't think there is too much of art left in digital marketing as such, especially performance. I think so. That's a new skill that has kind of come. So lots of data out there that is kind of possible for you to kind of do that. So I think there you need to go down, really kind of build a very, very strong moat in terms of what a search guy kind of does, what a social person kind of does, so on and so forth. But if I kind of take back and say, if you want to really build a strong brand, visual has been the story of storytelling format then and now. If you really want to convey a powerful story, it was possibly television those days. You do a video ad at this point in time, short or long format, whatever it might be, in terms of a YouTube or an Insta or wherever that is. So your brand is still kind of told. The powerful story, if you have the budget, whether it's small or large, is visual video as a format, right? Where you're kind of pushing this has kind of changed from then to now, but that becomes a very, very strong, storytelling format hasn't changed, in my opinion, right? So parts of it has changed, the fundamentals hasn't. The time that a consumer has been fragmented to such an extent, possibly the competition has kind of increased in every category, right? So that becomes, if I kind of go back 20 years to now, everything has increased, from population to relevant population to population that can afford something, population that is lots more aware, population that is possibly lots more instant gratification led, so on and so forth. So those are the challenges as such. But the core proposition of what a marketeer's role is hasn't changed then and now, except for the digital piece that's kind of come in and made specialization in some areas far more necessary, and thereby how do you kind of deliver on that?
So when you think about it, and this is a argument of sorts, that in trying to increase its legibility of brand and its value to the organization, do you think we're taking away a little bit from the storytelling that you just mentioned?
No, I think absolutely. So, no, when I kind of talk to startup founders, everybody talks about brand as a moat, especially if you're a consumer, if you're in the consumer industry, right? Brand takes time, brand takes investment, brand takes great ideas, brand takes understanding what the emotions are, right? It's just not about having money, getting a celebrity, doing a TV commercial, running it during IPL, right? And then you come out and then say that half the people don't remember your ad, half the people don't know what the relevance to their ad is, right? So I think it's become very, very short time kind of focused of late, at least in the startup ecosystem. So I think people need to be patient with what brand as a concept is, right? So the challenge with over analysis is the art part of really creating those emotional communication somewhere has kind of fallen away. The time to listen, observe your consumers in a very meaningful way for you to kind of really, what is the big idea for which the brand stands for? We can have campaign ideas, right? But what does a brand stand for a period of time at the core, right? I think that's sometimes kind of missed out. And that's why every time we kind of go back and say, what are the good brand campaigns in the country? You still kind of go and say, people say Fevicol and Asian Paints and Titan and whatnot. They are still relevant. They are as relevant as what they were 20 or 30 years back. If not, if at all, they've actually increased the market share in many categories, right? So where it comes from is that core powerful idea of how they think through what a brand needs to be, and conveying that powerful idea through various formats, right? So that's still relevant. I think that still is. And one of the things I keep noticing is which are the companies that really keeps making this very, very powerful communication. And they are the same. It's the Nikes, it's the Dove, right? It's the Apples. And they've been making these, again, the formats might have changed, the mediums might have changed, but those powerful videos that they come out with still is the core form of how they kind of convey brand, right? So that hasn't changed. So I think we need to kind of go back, at least for startups, they need to kind of go back and give it enough time to kind of really, uh, decide what the brand should be for that product that they're selling within the category they're selling in.
Got it. Any recent favorites? Indian brands, even IPL?
Not really. I mean, actually, I don't have too many. Actually, I don't have too many
That's
favorites.
actually quite a powerful statement,
Yeah. No. I
in the
do.
context of what we just spoke.
Yeah. So I keep kind of, I love watching ads. I do kind of, when recently, at Super Bowl, I kind of saw what are the Super Bowl ads. I just went through a few. I loved some of them out there in terms of storytelling. It is what to say. None of the recent campaigns have actually struck a chord, at least with me, in terms of Indian campaigns. Some of them are, they have made me aware of that brand, but I'm not sure, I think it's very, very short-lived in the sense of, from a time point of view. I still like I still go back in time in terms of some of the campaigns. I'm almost like, if you ask me music, I'd say I'm a classic rock, kind of a guy. Same thing with the Indian advertising. I'll still keep going back to memorable ads that was done. They're far and few right now. I think there were lots that was kind of done possibly even 8-10 years back. So yeah.
So to take a recent context, Piyush Pandey is still greater than Poonam Pandey, which is a good thing, I guess. So I know you said probably it's in 2010 or something that you decided that you probably want to become a VC. But do you think this idea of being brand led had some sort of motivation in you becoming a VC?
Not really. I think I got the first time I met VCs in the form of humans. Otherwise, I've been kind of reading about them. Was when I joined Myntra, right? And I met 3 or 4 amazing set of folks out there. I'm just going to kind of name them, right? I met Subrata from Axel, and I met Lee Fixel from Tiger. And I really liked the way they saw things as investors. I really liked. I mean, the points of view they had from different industries, cross references of how these things work in different countries. So it was those conversations in terms of feedback. Whether it was a board meeting or even just a reflection on the marketing campaign, was very different from regular folks, right? Because it came from a fairly different, broader view of things. So I said this is a nice place to kind of be in, to really have varied experiences and say that can I be that investor, right? Can I be a VC? So that's how the things started. And then I went about kind of talking to a few folks in terms of how do you kind of get into the industry. And one feedback that I got from multiple folks is, see if you can kind of work in multiple industries, form points of view, see if you can kind of do lots of 0 to 1 journeys, and really kind of start liking it. So I think Myntra, Flipkart, Vizury, all that happened after 2010. Right, and all of these were very, very clearly by design. I kind of, if I got an opportunity, I kind of worked there, observed, learned, and then kind of went back and said, now these are some of the frameworks that I can kind of use if I want to kind of be a VC. So that was kind of one. The second bit was, I said, and I was kind of thinking to myself that lots of early stage founders, marketing is still a core function, and there was a clear delta in terms of understanding of marketing out there. And lots of tech founders who came in, they had tech background, not necessarily a marketing background. And the art of marketing was not something that many of them kind of had. Right? Science is easy. So I think all of them is digital marketing, not necessarily brand marketing. Right? So I said, can I kind of add value there if I kind of become a VC? And the third, most important was, I tried breaking into this after about 4 or 5 years. After 5 years of working, I kind of went in. Actually, after Vizury, I kind of said I'm ready to kind of take up a VC role. And I reached out to a set of VCs. Then I kind of understood that I was almost taken back in time like when I started my life, which is again, it's pedigreed. You need to be of a pedigree. And at that point in time, some of the VCs, not even Indian pedigree, you need to have an international pedigree in terms of why, that was one. And second,
Gated community.
it was a gated community. And second, I mean, I didn't even get a chance to talk to folks, live alone. So I was kind of rejected on the resume front itself that, no, you're not a fit out here. And the second bit is you had to either be a pedigreed person or you had to be from the industry, right? And I said, you know what, extremely hard to kind of break in. And that time, when I kind of reflected, I said, maybe FMCG was far more easier than breaking into the VC landscape. So I said, maybe I need to do lots more work to kind of come back into this. So went again with the flow, but very, very clearly with VC as a final piece. Then went through different sets of kind of career, went. And I think sometime in 2018, after Flipkart, then I joined GE Healthcare. GE gave me some bit of exposure to investments, so on and so forth. But by then, I'd kind of thought that maybe there is a very clear opportunity for me to do something on my own. And so instead of kind of joining a VC firm, and that's how, the rest of the story of me talking to my other two partners in the fund, who I think I'll talk about that as well, right? And how we kind of came together to say, can we start our own kind of fund? And that's how we embarked on the journey of starting a VC firm. But largely, this was, can operators kind of become VC? And can you really help beyond capital? Because as a team, you have kind of been lucky to work for some of these startups very early in your life. You've made some mistakes. You've done certain things right. So how can you really kind of get all of that from a learning point of view and help, on day zero when a startup founder kind of meets up and you want to kind of invest and kind of help them kind of grow. So I think those were some of the frameworks, that led me to the VC path very late in my life. But I think that was possibly the best decision I kind of took.
Oh, I completely agree on both the perspectives, right? One is the operator perspective and the other is the marketing perspective. And I actually wanted to double click because you said something about that. Now that you are a VC, is your perspective of brand different? How do you view brand now? Because you mentioned that, that was a good learning for you, that when you saw them viewing brand at a different level. What is that level? Can you, elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is, irrespective of whatever you're kind of building, whether you're building a financial services or whether you're building a consumer brand in the beauty and personal care space or in anything else, right? If you have an end consumer and if brand is going to be a moat, one needs to kind of realize that it is a long-term moat. You need to kind of keep doing small things based on how much talent is available internally, how much of budget that you have. You keep just kind of making those investments. It's almost like an SIP, right? But keep doing the right thing as far as the framework is concerned. And what is it that your core service offers in terms of benefit to a consumer? And over a period of time, that compounds and it becomes that so-called brand, right? And it keeps kind of evolving. It keeps kind of getting stronger. And the way is not to kind of overspend very early in your life and kind of get into large format production, long format or otherwise, and then kind of wanting to kind of really kind of shrink time and say, I want to build this brand in 12 months and 18 months, spend everything and then go back to the drawing board and say, no, nothing much happened, right? So one of the learnings or one of the things that at least and we invest very early, we are an early stage kind of VC firm, is the fact that really think medium and long term as far as brand is concerned. Do just the right things on a daily basis, and that is good enough for it to kind of compound at some point in time. Just be patient with that journey, right? There is no way you can kind of really shrink that time period unless and until you have so much of money to overspend, right? So I think that is one big learning. And that at least as a fund, when we kind of invest, that's something that we kind of communicate to the founders. And most of them take it, as a very, very clear feedback. And there are enough and more examples of brands that's kind of done the other way and not really kind of succeeded. There is enough or more examples out there. So I think that's the core. And two is really kind of for founders to say that brand is not easily understood. It's a very amorphous kind of a thing, this brand,
Ambiguous
right?
term, yes.
We are very, very extremely ambiguous in terms of what it is. But if you kind of break it down and say, what it essentially means, right? And say that finally it's a currency for trust. And so you do all the things that is right, that will kind of help you build that trust. And everything that you do are just those deposits that you kind of keep making. So I think that's what it is. So I think that's something that we do with the startups that we work for. And I think that is kind of slowly kind of rewarding in terms of how that is kind of getting both assimilated within the organization and how they kind of as founding team kind of look at brand as a subject itself.
Great echo of what when I spoke to Guru, basically we said that brand is basically a heuristic for trust. So I think that is the underlying aspect of brand. And I think sometimes people forget that it's not just a campaign or some value proposition communication that you're doing. It's all of the experiences and touch points of any product or service that actually builds a brand over the long term. And you don't necessarily have to do large campaigns or spend a lot of money every day for you to build a brand.
True.
Great. Any specific portfolio startups, for instance, where you think the brand lens has helped disproportionately more than your other cohort startups?
See, in our portfolio, because our portfolio is fairly young, right? I mean, we are we are in the fourth year of investing, right? So I think most of the companies are moved from C to a Series A kind of fund from an investment timeline point of view. So they are still, I would say, very, very early brands are out there, right? But if I kind of just look at customer relevance and what the product has done from a relevant audience point of view, I think there are a couple of them who've done a phenomenally good job, though in a very, very small context, right? So we have a brand called Illuvia in the beauty and personal care segment. It sells the product. It's largely, at the core of Illuvia is they make very few products. Hair care is what they kind of, address. In hair care, they kind of took a niche of hard water related issues in the country. Extremely R&D driven kind of a product out there, saying that 70% of India gets hard water and it has its own sort of impact on hair. And thereby, how do you kind of minimize those impacts? And that's how the product kind of came about. And unlike regular D2C brand, they sell it through the salon network, right? Salons is where you kind of actually kind of buy into this product, right? So very different distribution network as well. But what I've seen is the product delivery in terms of, it's as simple as if you are getting hard water and if there is a problem, there's a very, very high efficacy kind of a product to kind of use, the shampoo, conditioner, and the serum, right? So as long as you're able to kind of tell the story at the point of sale, in this case salon, and in the packaging, on your website, in a very, very easy manner, you kind of see that the first offtake of the product delivers on the promise, you keep coming back, right? So we have seen a very high repeatability, both from salon owners wanting to buy into this product, saying that this really is something that my consumers love, so my value kind of goes up, and consumers loving it out there as well, because it's very, very high on efficacy, right? So if you have a very powerful product, and if you're even able to make that, in the value chain of where product is sold, how we're kind of communicating the value prop in simple way, I think that is good enough for you, right? Where it, I think, becomes challenging is if the product doesn't deliver on its core promise, and if it's largely me too, and you're going to play on something not very concrete in terms of what the value prop is, then it becomes a difficult challenge, right? But if you have a very, very strong product, then it's, even with a limited budget, in a limited time frame, you can make it very relevant to that audience. I would say Illuvia is one of the examples that's done well. Long way to go, but I think within the early days, I think they've done a good job.
Yeah, so I think that speaks to the overall differentiation aspect of it. I think it was Jeremy Liu who said that basically when there's no distribution and the consumer market is new, then whoever wins distribution is king. Then once consumers get to know a bit of this, then whoever has a better product wins. And then when product gets on parity is where brand actually starts playing a disproportionate role in the overall growth of the business. So I think that here we are at product differentiation. And I think that is something that probably gets lost in this entire commodification of pretty much every category that you see. So completely agree with you on that. All right. So now we get personal with stuff. So in the last episode with Guru, we were discussing great managers and how I used to take amazing bosses for granted. So you were probably one of my first amazing managers that I had. In fact, I remember you were the first guy to tell me to stop calling you sir. So if people are listening and they're smirking, don't, because that was actually a done thing until these millennials came over and took over the entire thing. So you have pretty sorted as a manager. WorldSpace was what, 6 years into your career, so you're pretty sorted there. And it continued in Myntra, because I remember that your team gave you the now well-known nickname of SRK. If I and that was only your initials. If I had to take from a Tide campaign that is now running, I would say you're pretty much stress remover king, right? And that's also the origin of this entire good morning joke, because I remember in Myntra you are up to your neck in terms of meetings through the day, and it's only at about 5:30 that I would finally get you alone so I could speak some 30 minutes of digital and social media to you. I'd imagine you would be like super tired after this long day, and then I would knock and come over, and then you'll be smiling like a Buddha and saying, "Yeah, good morning," kind of, And then I would think of it as you're just starting the day, and I would automatically respond with "Good morning, Sanjay." So, what is the secret here of you, A, being sorted as a manager, and B, being able to have that kind of an energy through the day? I suspect you haven't changed much since then. So, what's the secret here?
First, foremost, thanks that I was a good manager. I think thanks for that. So I think I kind of alluded on this a little while, right, in the conversation, which is very early on, I kind of got a mix of both good and not so good managers very early in my life. It also and it was chalk and cheese in terms of what it meant in terms of what your delivery was, whatever level in the organization that you were at. What the team thought of you and the manager, and how you kind of really get the best out of your team. And I clearly saw this, what a good manager persona was, what a bad manager persona was. And I was so clear that, these are the traits of a good manager, right? And I think I started kind of developing on that. Culture, value systems is something that I was very passionate about very early in my life beyond marketing. So I think I read a lot, went through a whole bunch of meeting people out there from the industry. So I think I started having a framework that you need to kind of treat people with respect, number one. Number two is, again, big learning for me is whether you're a manager or not, if you have certain vulnerabilities, it's okay to show to the team. I think team comes together to help you solve that, right? Just being transparent out there, saying that, what, hey team, this is a challenge. I cannot do it. Can we sit and kind of trash things around and kind of really figure out, right? I think that was the second one. And third one is I've seen ideas come from different corners in an organization, not necessarily from marketing, but even from others, right? So I think, again, so that was the third bit in terms of just making sure that if I need to succeed, the team needs to kind of help me out there. So there was a bit of selfishness that if I treat the team right, I would kind of win, right? So I think it was just that very early that I kind of got a whiff of, and I said that's something that I'm going to kind of continue. And I think, again, fortunate. I see all this is good in terms of frameworks, but you need to have good people both above and below and on the side to finally kind of believe that this works. So I think it kind of got stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And I said, that's the only way forward. There is no other way to kind of, deliver on anything. And taking it all the way to currently me running a VC, I think the luckiest thing that has happened is my two partners, right? Bhushan and Raveen are the two partners in my fund. And every time I kind of talk to both of them, I'm like, you know what? I'm so lucky, right? To kind of, this is the team, right? And each of us kind of bringing something very different to the table. So anytime any of us have anything to be discussed, it's very, very open out there for each of us to kind of help each other. We have lots of constructive confrontation as a framework, but there is this value system that we kind of go by, right? I think that kind of holds us together, right? So even in this case, you need to be lucky to have a team together. And VC is a fairly small people-led, relationship-led kind of a business, unlike corporate large organizations. So I think it plays a part in terms of what you sow is what you reap. And I've always kind of seen life like that. I don't want certain things, once it's kind of past the date. So you just kind of move on and just keep doing the right things as much as possible. So I think that's possibly what has kind of led me to where I am right now. So people have been nice to me, and it was just I need to kind of reciprocate of being just nice to people, and it doesn't take too much of time or effort to just being nice with people, right? So I think that's pretty much it.
I absolutely agree with that. I think the other point there is that it somehow also reflects in the work. So, if I had to think about it, I owe my first digital campaign back in 2004 when you allowed me to take that hoarding off the Hyderabad campaign and run a Google PPC instead. I'm glad that it worked out for everybody concerned, because
Yeah.
WorldSpace, I think, scaled that up crazy after that. Then again at Myntra, right? So you're talking about 2011, where barely anyone had any idea of social media, and then we got to build a social media playbook from scratch in 2011. That shows a sort of an experimental mindset as a marketeer or even as a person. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's been, I think, a very strong kind of framework for me. That is that there are certain things unknown, and there is a percentage of the unknown which you need to kind of experiment with. And if it works, you kind of double down. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So I always had an experimental budget in all my marketing budgeting that I've done all my life, right? It just varied in terms of the context, right? It's been as high as 20% in certain cases, but it's so important to have that, that's set aside in terms of that, for you to kind of experiment, right? You cannot keep kind of replicating the same thing cross industry,
Absolutely.
based on where you are. So totally agree on the need for that. Bit of risk taking, calculated, very, very important. A bit of experimentation, extremely important.
So if I look at all this in totality, I would say that there is an underlying abundance mindset about you. Is that a natural thing, and you're not even conscious of it, or is that something that you have built up over a period of time? This way of looking at the world.
I haven't thought of it that way at all. It's the first time I'm hearing that. So, not really. No, I've never thought I had that as a mindset. Uh, but if possible, uh, if it's within my capability to kind of address or help somebody in some situation, and if they've asked me for some feedback, I try hard to kind of do some work and give a fairly constructive feedback. Right? I really think hard about that. What comes naturally, I believe, is empathy. Right? I think that comes naturally to me if I kind of do look at people in a fairly, what to say, if they're going through a challenge, I see the challenge for what it is. I try to remove lots of the biases, and if I can kind of help the situation, I would kind of give my points of view, irrespective of whether they want to take it or not. All right. But if asked, I would kind of give my point of view out there. So I think it is just that. And if few people kind of got helped in the bargain, great. If not, I have not done harm to anyone. So you just kind of move on. Right. So I think it's just been that. And I think it's more a reflection of what happened to me as an individual. I think lots of people have given their time and they put in effort that helped me get where I am. Everybody, right, in across the last 23, 24 years, right? So I think it just makes it important for you to kind of do the right thing out there. And I don't take myself too seriously. So, as long as it helps somebody, you just kind of go over doing it. That's pretty much it.
Super. So we'll move on to the last question, because I promised we'll talk about it. So what is this new midlife recreation that you're up to? You just ran a full marathon in Mumbai. You are, from what I spoke to you last, you're also entertaining that child within you, and in your 50s you want to become an Avenger, specifically Iron Man. So why are you swimming against the tide? What are you running away from? What is happening here?
Yeah. So I think lots of things in my life started, fairly late. As far as I became a VC very late in my life. So running, it was, I think it happened by accident, actually. I didn't know that I would enjoy running so much. I think it just happened a year before the pandemic. I think 2019 is when there was a group of people who used to go to Cubbon Park. My current partner, Raveen, and a set of folks used to go to Cubbon Park, and they used to run, and they have done a bunch of half marathons prior to that. So I used to go Sunday morning, run with them, possibly 5, maximum 7, 8 kilometers. So I was always reasonably good in sports. I used to play badminton a lot, but running was never part of that. So every Sunday was what my running was. And that led me to, they were planning a half marathon at some point in time in Goa. This was, I believe, 2018, December was the race. And they asked me to sign up for that. And I wasn't sure from 5 can I run at 21. But either ways, I kind of signed up thinking it's Goa, I'm going to run and it's going to be fun. And that was horrendous in terms of, just running that half marathon in that heat. And I think it took a while to kind of complete that race. Lots of things was, for the first time I'm running a marathon officially. I keep joking about it that, so you have this hydration points during the run. I didn't know those were hydration points. So there were points, and they used to have water, they used to have oranges, some chickies, some chocolates, whatnot. And I stopped at the first one, which came after 2 kilometers. And there was a plate. And I stopped and took the plate, put all the things on my plate, and I started eating. And that's when, one of my friends said, it's not a buffet. You're supposed to just have water and start running. So I think the first thing that I kind of started running, and I've been running for 3 hours, right? And I've still not completed this run. And I was tired as hell. I was questioning lots of things in life. And I think I'd finished about 19 or 20 kilometers by then. And somebody told me that if you're not completing this in 3.5 hours, they won't give you the medal, right? I'm like, I've really spent 3 hours, whatever. And so I kind of completed 3 hours 15 or whatever, and I completed the run. And they gave me the medal. And the medal was, I don't know, something, I was very happy with the medal. I took that medal. Right? And I said, okay, this is nice. That I finished the run. And I went back and I said, and all others did reasonably well. Right? All my friends who were kind of fan. And I said, I need to kind of do far better. I can run far better. So I started kind of training myself next year, 2019. And did slightly better, started enjoying those runs. And somewhere, I think, during pandemic, that was the only sport that was available, which is you get up in the morning and run on MG Road. There was no traffic. You could run anywhere, and it was good. And I started reading books on marathons, on running, on endurance, and so on and so forth. And eventually, I think somewhere in 2020, I fell in love with the sport. And I said, really want to kind of, do everything that's possible over the next, say, 5-10 years. And I said, what are the things that is meaningful in this? I said, I need to kind of do a bunch of half marathons, really kind of improve your timing, get into full, if possible, do a half Ironman and a full Ironman, and so on and so forth. So I think those were just goals that I had. So from then on. So I think last year, the goal was to do 15 half, and to see if I can do a sub 2 hour kind of a half marathon. So those things I kind of achieved. And then I said, I want to do a full. I was injured just before my full marathon, but managed to kind of do that. And now I think I have a set of goals in terms of doing few more fulls in a far better way, improve on that. And then see if I can do a half iron at some point in time. And then I will move to the madness of a full Ironman. But having said that, I think it's impacted my other aspects of life in a very, very positive way, right? And just setting up these hard goals for yourself and training towards it, just for yourself. I'm not competing with anyone. It is for me to kind of finish this. Just getting up, training yourself, getting to the start line, just keep doing. And if you fail again, keep going back. I think that's been nice. It's my own way of competing within myself to see can I keep getting better. So it's a midlife crisis, but it's kind of it's helped me kind of at least benefits are there. So I'm just going to continue as much as possible.
All right. With that, we have run out of time. Okay, that's a pun. So thank you so much for taking the time, Sanjay, and may all your ventures and adventures multiply. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Manu. It was super fun to kind of be here. Lovely.
So that was a wonderful conversation with Sanjay, someone who has known me grow from a marketing executive right up to being a fractional CMO now. Thank you all for listening. Check me out at www.manuprasad.com.